we'll talk about the test two. I'm gonna have it pretty quickly. So far, test two is pretty easy. Right? Very, very easy thing. Well, we gotta do one thing that's a little bit more challenging, and that's this chapter today on growth. Capital accumulation. And the economics of ideas. Chapter 8, I believe.
It is.
Now, we learned that the thing we care the most about is what? What's the thing you care the most about?
Ourselves.
Well, yourself in one sense. So maybe you take a psychology class for that or something. But what you really care about is yourself and what things you have. So while it's got a boring name, what we really care about is economic growth or GDP. We care about GDP. And we learned that in the last chapter, just before we broke, we learned what? What's the overriding theme? Of the last chapter. Everyone started out poor. Some people are richer than others today. I was just reading something over the weekend. I read this Substack this guy has on technology. And he talked about salt. He's talking about salt. And that a little over 100 years ago, 70 to 85% of budgets went to food and drink. 70 to 85% of family budget went to food or drink. So that's really how poor people were. And of course, his point was that anything that could enhance or preserve food was really, really important because it was such a big part of the budget. But so some people are rich and some people are poor. What does that say to you? Right? You care about what things you have. Some people have more things than others. What do you want to do? Well, I guess you could steal from the rich, right? Either directly by becoming a mugger, but becoming a mugger is not very good anymore. It's one of those crimes that has gone away. Why is the crime of mugging gone away?
People don't carry cash.
Yeah, nobody carries cash anymore. Everybody uses a debit card. So that's not very good. Also, what's true about the rich, as far as robbing them goes? they can afford to pay somebody bigger than you to kick your ass. Right? What's true about rich people? Do they depend upon the police? No, they depend upon private security a lot. Will you get a chance to bump into Bill Gates and steal his wallet? He probably has more cash than you and me on him. And that probably isn't gonna happen, right? Can you, run past Taylor Swift and grab her purse? Probably not. Well, she probably doesn't even carry a purse, right? Somebody carries it for her, probably.
Well, she carries one.
So, now, alternatively, so being a mugger is not that good a thing. Alternatively, what can you do? You can use the government to steal from them. Right? We'll elect these guys and they'll steal money from the rich people and give it to us. And there are plenty of politicians out there running who will tell you they'll do that for you. But of course, what happens?
That's not feasible because the rich are just gonna pass the cost on to the rest of us in
Well,
other ways.
yeah, maybe, maybe Taylor Swift raises concert ticket prices to match however much you take from her. I don't know. Certainly there are a lot of politicians that will claim to do this. But of course, taking money from the rich and giving it to the poor involves what? Middle-class government bureaucrats. So who gets the money? Well, you don't need to raise your hand, but anybody that's really, really been poor here knows that while the government takes a lot of money from people, particularly if you've been poor and then later on not been poor, you see how much money the government takes from you. The government takes a lot of money from people. Right, so we have this huge government budget deficit. How much of that money gets to the poor? Not all that much, that's right. So, and of course, I had a student, I used to have a libertarian group gave me some money to have a book club, an economics book club, and we would read. I may have told you guys about this. We'd read a book each semester. The students got a stipend of a couple $100. Read the book, we'd meet 7 or 8 times and talk about the book during the semester. And one of my students in that was an accounting student. And he was a libertarian accountant, so his views were very limited government. So he was greatly offended that I had to have all this information on him to pay him. But of course, what's true about the University of South Alabama? There's this humongous pool of money here, right? And who does the money belong to?
Not students.
Nobody. Nobody. So what will happen to that money? An accountant should know. That's sort of what accounting procedures are about, right? That money will disappear unless somebody's keeping track of it. So it's a little funny to me that he didn't, despite being a libertarian accountant, he didn't get that. If there's a big government, if there's a big pool of money that nobody owns, you gotta keep track of it in some way. So, but you could do that with the government, but I know, you could do the same thing. You could have the government get money for you from the rich, but alternatively, what can you do? What's the third that way you can track this problem? Do what it takes to make yourself valuable, right? Now, maybe my nursing students are better people than the rest of us and they just want to help people out, but it turns out helping people out by being a nurse is pretty high paying right now, relative. When you get out of here, you're gonna make pretty pretty high salary compared to the average college graduate. So it's a good thing right now. As I said, maybe you need to get a minor in mortuary science, because all of us baby boomers are dying too. And since we're all dead, there'll be fewer people for you nurses to work on. But you could try to do what people do to become rich. You can try to do the things that produce goods. And we have to talk about growth. We got to talk about production. So, how do we produce something? Well, sadly, we have a production function. You're not going to like our production function. We're going to write it out like that. How many people don't like that? Right? It's not very good. This is actually your friend. This basically says to produce something, you have to have things to produce it with. If we were across the parking lot here, what's across our parking lot here? Which direction? Maybe that direction. What building is there? Oh, the music area, the one, then the one back that way. The engineering building, right? What's true in the engineering building? You have to build the damn bridge, right? You don't get to say, get some tools and get some people and you can build something, right? So while ours is abstract, and abstractions are hard to think about, you know, it's hard to get a good handle on something when it's abstract. Anybody start out in the College of Engineering and differential equations drive them away or something? I know we've got a couple of engineers in here. You actually have to learn, you actually have to figure out how to make something over there. We can be abstract. And so, in our production function, Y is goods, GDP, and actually, maybe I should make both of these lowercase, because that's what we've called them, just to be consistent, lowercase. The function is a mathematical relationship. You know, if you take 5 guys and 5 shovels, you can dig a ditch in 8 hours. Or if you take 1 guy and a backhoe, you can dig a ditch in 2 hours or something. There's some mathematical relationship. Throughout the book, I think they use the square root of capital, or the square root of capital and labor or something. They use a numerical example. They use it in the book in the appendices. A is technology, or, and then where the authors put it is better than maybe other economists, ideas. Technology is just ideas. K is capital, or as I put it, tools. So that we don't have much, we don't get confused as to what we're talking about. Money capital, green pieces of paper, they don't produce anything. A shovel can help you produce something. L is labor. And E is the effectiveness of labor. It allows labor to contain human capital. Right? We could throw each and every one of you into a hospital, into some other type of business, into a classroom, and you could do something today, right? You could immediately do something and produce some value there. But hopefully when you get out of here, what will be true? You'll be able to produce more value. You'll know some things, you'll have some skills that will help you, right? Nurses produce more value than orderlies in hospitals. People with accounting, management, marketing skills produce more for a business than the janitor. Somebody that has some idea about education, knows some things about education and testing, produces more in the classroom than, just somebody thrown in there who could maybe be a teacher's aide, watch the kids or something. Make them not whisper to each other or run around or whatever you could do. All right, so basically this is our production function. This says that if you take some labor, and it all isn't homogeneous, the labor, some tools, and you take some idea, like you hold the shovel by the handle and you put your foot on it to drive it into the earth to dig, you can produce some output. So what's missing from what do our dots include? Well, for one thing, location, right? Land. Can be a little more, you might be more productive in one hospital than another. You might be more productive and make more money in a city hospital because you're always busy than you are in a hospital where there's not as much volume of patients going through. marginal product of capital, what's happening to the slope? As capital increases, what's happening to the slope?
Starts to flatten.
It's going down towards zero. So this is what's called the diminishing returns to a factor. If you add more and more of a variable input, what's the variable input in our case? I'm on a graph over there. What's varying? Capital. I don't know. Right, that says K in our case, not Ken. So make sure you get it that way, so that you'll be able to tell. Eventually, additions to output fall or decline, diminishing returns to a factor. This is sort of an important idea. Actually, it's a fancy way of saying, what? What have we said here? There's an old adage your grandmother taught you that this explains. What's that adage?
Goes up, must come down.
Nope. That's not necessarily true. Some grandmother adages are true, others aren't. Too many cooks spoil the broth. Right? If you keep adding more, in that case labor, more and more cooks into a fixed kitchen, what's true? It's not going to work out that way. So, in our case, you keep, if you have a lawnmowing business, and you have one lawnmower and we give you, you're fixed, we give you another lawnmower, well then you got a backup one if the one stops. And we give you a third lawnmower, what's it gonna do to output? Right, the first one might help you, maybe you can, and maybe even the third one would help. Maybe you can use lawnmowers, use each lawnmower till it runs out of gas, go to the next lawnmower, right? You don't have to refill it with gas. But eventually you're gonna get enough lawnmowers that you just don't need it. It's not gonna help you. And that reminds me, I should have said, I left out to some fixed inputs. What are the fixed inputs in our case? Ideas and effective labor. Now, diminishing returns to a factor is very important. Without diminishing returns to a factor, what would be true? Well, the famous graduate school question is, without diminishing returns to a factor, you could grow the world's true false. Without diminishing returns to a factor, you could grow the world's food in a flower pot if you could make the flower pot small enough. Right? If, without diminishing returns to a factor, if it, essentially you could grow the entire world's food on a grain of soil by adding more workers, more seed, more fertilizer, etc. to it. Can you? No, because at some point you have to have more soil. So it's really important to have diminishing returns. And your grandmothers were right that time, right? If what happens when you add more? Right? In fact, anybody been to a family reunion recently where you're outside maybe barbecuing, or maybe you're in the house, and too many people are trying to contribute to how to cook the meal? One more source of family fights at family reunions, right? Disagreement on how to do it. Or the oven gets opened 3 times, checking to see if it's done, but nobody opens it when it's actually done. And we end up with burned food. Because nobody's responsible. Alright, so this is our production relationship. And notice this thing should hit 0 here, right when this thing becomes flat. And some people think diminishing returns means it becomes negative. It doesn't have to become negative, but you can imagine, right? You get, anybody work in a fast food restaurant?
Years ago.
Yeah, if they keep adding more and more workers inside in the food part, what's gonna happen? Eventually you get in each other's way, right? If you put 100,000 people on an acre of land trying to grow food, what would happen? You're stepping on each other's work. So it would become negative. Adding additional people would reduce output. You have enough lawnmowers that you're having to shuffle them around rather than refilling one with gas. You're shuffling around lawnmowers to get to the one that's got gas in it still. All those types of things, could become negative, and probably does it in a lot of cases. But it doesn't have to. Diminishing returns just says that the marginal product declines. Okay, so I'm on C, right? Is that right, or am I on B?
See,
C? No, not C for this. I think I'm on B. I haven't done this. So capital B for this. So let's talk about investment and depreciation. Investment I is the change in capital over time. I guess under capital I should put tools. Depreciation we're going to call it the little d is the depreciation rate. So that's it's not an English D, it's a Greek D. It's a little Greek D. Just like this is a capital Greek D. It's just commonly used. Is the wearing out of machines or capital or tools, as you like.
Is that an S before the colon?
That's the little capital lowercase Greek.
That's a lowercase Greek D. Looks like that.
Thank you.
So, if depreciation is greater than investment, that implies what?
That capital will go down in the long term.
Yeah, we're wearing out more capital than we're adding, so capital falls. If depreciation is less than investment, then what's gotta happen? We're wearing out less capital than we're adding, so what has to happen?
It rises.
Capital has to rise. And if depreciation equals investment, that implies capital stays the same. We're going to call this a steady state. So we can go back to our graph. We can draw a production function in. We can draw our depreciation in. We can draw our investment function in, right? We've already talked about what the production function looks like. Depreciation, we're just going to assume a constant rate. That's the easiest thing to do. We're sort of becoming accountants here, doing it the easy way. When we talk about depreciation in economics, what are we talking about?
Value of money going down.
It has nothing to do with money. The wearing out of machines, the wearing out of the chair that you're using today, the chair that I'm using is depreciating it as we sit in it. When I first started here for the first several years, they had these fixed pedestal chairs you couldn't move. And they were hard plastic. Didn't look very comfortable. I don't know if they were or not. But people would lean back on them. They've been here for years and years and years, and every once in a while, it's usually on the back row, I guess, because you could pressure on them on the back row, and people did. But every once in a while, a student would fall over. The chair would break loose. Did it break loose because of that student that day? No, it had worn out slowly over time. Just as an aside, only a public university could get away with it. Only a public university with a hospital could get away with that, right? Because no private company would do that. They'd get sued out of existence. And, you know, might get a president fired in a public university, except what's true about this public universities like this one. If you run hospitals, you get sued every year, probably every month. So you have a contingency fund for, you know, a liability fund, because you can't run, you know, you can't run hospitals perfectly. People are gonna get injured. So it's probably a small blip compared to the hospital things, what we were doing with students here. But that's the wearing out. But, you know, in accounting, when they talk about depreciation, if you've had an accounting class, they're really talking about IRS rules, because you gotta do something. You can't measure how much your desk wore out today. So you gotta do something, they come up with these rules. But then, once we go to do it empirically, we've gotta say it's some kind, you know, we could say it's a varying rate, we could make it a function. But a lot of times in economics, we just say it's 10%. You know, we sort of guess. On average in society, it's 10%. You've gotta do something. All right, then we've got an investment function. What happens to investment? As companies, as societies get richer, what happens to the amount they invest?
Yes, sir.
It goes up. As you have more capital, you have more investment. So we've got some kind of investment function that looks like this. If we happen to be at K1, what's true? We have depreciation 1, we have investment 1. Which is bigger, depreciation 1 or investment 1? Investment 1, right? Further from the origin, up, that means greater. So that means this capital, according to us here, depreciation is less than investment, it's gonna go up. If we're over here, now at K2, at K2, what's going to be true? We've got investment 2, we've got depreciation 2, which is greater. Anyone? Which is greater? Depreciation 2 or investment 2? Which one's bigger? Which one's a bigger number? Depreciation 2. So, at K2, investment 2 is less than depreciation 2, which means we go in this direction, and of course we get to here. I'm going to call it K star, where investment star equals depreciation star. And again, we're going to call this a steady state. Which is sort of like an equilibrium. So this says a couple of things. It says there is some maximum amount of capital you want to have in society. Right? You won't go past that maximum amount of capital. There's a maximum number of tools you want. It says broadly, more tools, more production, right? But there is some maximum amount. So it's consistent with what we've done in the class. And of course, once we get to the steady state, really whatever capital you're at, you go up here and you get some steady state output, some amount of output, right? Once you know the amount of capital, the production function tells you what GDP is. That's the number of goods you have in society. So how can we get more goods out of this? What does our model tell us about more goods? Well, people could save more, shift that savings function up, right? That would create a intersection further out. We could make better capital goods that wear out more slowly. But that comes, I don't know, that's almost related to ideas. Or we could go shift that production function up by getting, we don't want to shift it up by more workers, but by getting more effective workers or better ideas. I want to come back to that. So, in some ways, this is saying, well, in some ways, the steady state's not the best idea, the best thing that economists ever found, right? Because what's the steady state say?
There's no growth.
Yeah, it's saying you're stuck in my childhood. 3, maybe 4 TV stations, black and white TV. Well, sometime in my childhood we got color TV. No cell phones.
The remote was attached to the TV by cord.
Oh no, no remotes. No remotes. I had to buy new TVs when you wore out the dial or the buttons. And of course, children
They were the remote.
were, children were the remote. The children were terrible because they would play with those things until they wore them out. But a lot of things you have now. No video games, so it's not all that good. Because why? Why isn't that all that good? What do we want? More. Even if you don't want to admit it aloud. More. So, but before we get to that, that's sort of what we're going to talk about next class. There is 2 types of growth. The first is catch-up growth. That's this. You're at K1, you're going to move to K star, and it's due to capital accumulation. Due to getting more tools, right? You don't have enough tools. This is Germany after World War II, South Korea after the Korean War. You know what to do, you just have to quickly reacquire your tools that you destroyed or your enemy destroyed during the war. The second type of growth is cutting edge growth. And it's due to new ideas. Right? Once you get to K star, you don't really want to be stuck, right? None of you guys want my childhood. So, you got to come up with new ideas. You have to invent the cell phone. You got to invent I guess chips really is what made the personal computer. You could make a computer small enough that somebody had to invent the chips that small that would.
And Wi-Fi. Somebody had to invent the Wi-Fi.
Well, some of that stuff was invented in World War II or even before.
An actress.
Yeah, I can't remember her name now. But there was also apparently some Scottish guy. Before the invention of the telephone, some Scottish guy came up with essentially the principles of fax machines. Which is really, I mean, I don't know how you come up with an idea for a fax machine before there's a phone, but you did. I guess sending an image over wire or something. And so, but somebody has to come up with the ideas. And there's one more additional problem here. If you look around the world, you know, England was the first sort of rich country, and then did the United States catch up with England? Yeah, did Germany catch up with England? Yeah, they kept getting themselves into wars and setting themselves back, but, you know, they'd get ahead of England and get in a war. Even starting in, you know, there were 3 of these European wars, 1870, the Franco-Prussian War, World War I, World War II, where every time Germany seemed to get ahead, they got themselves behind. But Japan, have they caught up to the U.S.? Yeah, essentially. South Korea, pretty close. Maybe not exactly, but pretty close. I don't know. When I go to the Mobile airport, I don't have a robot come down and greet me like in the Seoul airport. So it was really more of a toy than it wasn't serving any function. But they have, they have a lot of things. Maybe they're not quite as rich as Americans, but they seem to be catching up. And so a lot of countries seem to have caught up, but other countries seem to be stuck. Is there some kind of other intersection down here? Or do some countries have a different production function? In principle, right, part of the reason why catch-up growth is easier is once somebody else has invented something, it's pretty easy for you to invent it, right? This is true as a student too. There are a lot of really hard things out there that you learn. They were really hard for the first person to think them up, but they're pretty obvious, right? Once somebody says it, right? I mean, even if you don't like all the math, etc., it's really pretty obvious that as you add more and more of something and you're not increasing the other inputs, eventually it's not going to do you any good, right? To put it in English as opposed to math. But it's harder to think that up. So cutting edge is harder than catch-up growth. But it sort of says every country should have the same income eventually, right? And it also says, what about the U.S.? Every state should have the same income. For a long time, the South lagged behind. I don't know. Is Alabama? Do people in Alabama make less than people in New York and?
Cost of living's lower too.
Yeah, I mean, in real terms, that's why I took that capital Y to a lowercase y. We want to talk about goods. We don't want to talk about prices here. So it's, have the states caught up? Yeah, the states caught up for a while. The South cost themselves with some things they did institutionally. And of course, we can't all move to Wyoming. Wyoming's not going to be quite as rich because the soil's not as good. Different states have somewhat different advantages. But in theory, over time, the states have gotten closer and closer together. In terms of output per person. But still, maybe there's some kind of what letter am I on? Was that C?
Yeah.
I'm on D. So convergence conditional convergence. Convergence everyone, whether it's every country, every state, whatever, converges to the same GDP per capita the same Y, or some countries get caught in a middle income trap. Right, the countries of South America have done pretty well compared to the poorest countries in the world, but they haven't caught up completely. So why haven't they caught up completely? You know, I hinted at that a little bit with my stories of Argentina, I think. Argentina having the sixth largest economy at the dawn, in the 1920s. Why did they lag behind? But at least empirically, we seem to observe some countries converging to a lower level of income, other countries converging to a higher level. How are we doing? I'll tell you what, why don't we start that the next time? Why don't we talk for a minute about I think I can finish all of this in the next class, then we'll go over at least one. I sent you the test, right? The old test before. We can go over one or maybe both of the old tests, a week from today and a week from Thursday, have test 2.
Yeah.
So you got 10 days notice, got a weekend to study. I should, that makes it harder on me because I gotta get them graded before I go home on Thursday, but, oh well. And then that means, what, 2 weeks from today, you'll have 2 test grades, and you'll know. When's the last day of drop? Huh?
Thursday exam.
Oh, the day of the exam?
You have to be, last day of the class.
And that might be withdrawal.
Regular class, but not.
Anyway, you'll at least have 2 scores pretty soon. Give you a good idea. All right, see you guys.